Hello, Jesse. How are you?
Hi, how's it going?
Good, good. Here is still the morning, so still a little sleep, but I'm fine.
Oh,
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about your.
oh, it's wonderful. I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe you know I told you already in the mail. So I'm representing now the literary blog. So it's called uh One Book a Day. So we make our reviews. We are a team. We make reviews of different writers. And of course, we give our personal opinion, but also we want to also get the idea of the writer, of course. So we try to make this kind of interviews. So yeah, so I like to thank you and for all of them of the team of the literary blog for giving the opportunity to talk a little.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, first of all, I like to talk to you before going particularly to your most recent book, I think, in at least in Spanish, it's called Los Niños Seis in Spanish, the children six. So before that, going particularly to that book, I'd like to ask you about some things I'm curious. Maybe things you say about your work in some interviews or in some articles, and so in general. So first of all, and what I am curious is in one of your interviews, you mentioned that all of your books are part of the same work, of the same novel. So you are writing like a whole literary work. Actually, I was kind of surprised because in one interview, a very famous Mexican writer, maybe you know, Carlos Fuentes, he said actually something similar. But even further, he mentioned that at that time, there was the boom of the Latin American writers. He mentioned that he's not only writing with all of his books one like a whole novel, but all the Latin American writers were writing like the same novel. So you know this kind of all these famous Latin American writer Fuentes, Rulfo, Paz, Marquez, Borges are like responsible of writing like the history or like a big Latin American novel. So yeah, what I want to ask you is, do you think you are writing this kind of American novel with other people, with other young American writers, or do you consider that you are in a different kind of way?
it's a very good question. I think other people before, for instance, before Fuentes, had a similar idea like Balzac. Often
Mm,
all of Balzac's works are grouped as the human comedy. They call
mm,
like the totality of his work together, the human comedy. And certainly some right like Shakespeare, we tend to think of all of his things as like the speech of one person. Like philosophically, we think of it, you
mm,
know. Um, I think I think there are two sort of facets to your question with regard to my work and with regard to American literature in the present. I think I think we could say that there's something which many people would call American literature right now,
mm,
which is mostly made up of garbage. And it's
mm.
sort of like worthless and it's quite successful. And
Yeah,
this is often the work that is even translated into other languages from America. But I won't say the names of the people, but
mm,
it has really no value,
yeah,
because it takes no steps forward technically, the technical craft in English, and it takes no steps forward philosophically. It doesn't depict situations or characters that haven't been seen before. I think it largely falls under the influence of television, because I think most of these so-called writers, these so-called American writers, most of their experience is just watching television. Their experience is not reading Cervantes, you know.
mm, mm,
And neither is it reading the great works of English, like Borges, for instance, delve deep into like the real, like what the English tongue really is, like the
mm.
language of
Yeah,
English.
even like the ancient
And
English.
yeah, yeah,
Mm,
and Middle English and Old
mm,
English. works of Sir Thomas Browne, like really like deep English.
Mm.
To me, it seems like it's important if you write a sentence in English, it shouldn't be so easy to just put it to a different language, you know. However, a lot of the literature of the United States right now is not informed by past literature. It's just informed by TV and Hollywood, you know. So I would say it could be true that I am, to answer your question, that I am writing a book in common with other American writers. But I think probably some of those works have not come to light yet, because if you're writing real literature, difficult literature in the US right now, it's quite hard to get it published. No, people are not that interested in this type of literature in the US. And so probably there's some people who have written really beautiful novels and stories that are unpublished right now. So maybe in 50 years, these other parts of the novel that I'm writing with other people will begin to come to light. And it turns out that there's a woman in Connecticut who has written like 3 novels already. None of them are published,
Yeah.
and I would adore them.
Okay.
And you know, so I think that's quite possible. You know, I mean, Children 6, for instance, is a book that is only available in Spanish because it's a bit
Yeah.
strange. It's a little bit too difficult for English language readers.
Mm, I see.
Yeah.
And if this is the case, like this kind of American novels, for example, in my previous example, this Latin American novels was addressing or wanted to address some particular issues at that time, like identity of the, for example, the native people of the Latin American countries, the colonialism, this finding their all separate way, for example, from Spanish literature, like our own identity for Latin America as a whole, not only like independent countries, but like identity as a Latin American people. So in this case, so now, so what are these kind of issues that this hypothetical American novel has to address?
It's a strange time that we live in. In some ways, it is an unfortunate time,
Mm,
and in some ways, it is a very fortunate time.
mm,
I think some ways that it is unfortunate is, I think, you have a human population at any given moment, and the human population chooses to embrace some fields over other fields. I think a period, for instance, from around 1900 to 1940 is a period when many of the most intelligent, most thoughtful, most passionate people were artists and writers.
mm,
So basically, if you took all the children that were born during those years, of course, many died in World War One, but many of the most brilliant children became, you know, philosophers, writers, painters, sculptors. I think now some of those people don't have the opportunity to go on to become writers or philosophers or artists because they get sucked into things like you know, computer programming
mm,
or mathematics or science or business. These other fields kind of like suck
mm,
up a lot of people. And so I think that that's a sad thing because you don't see the sheer strength of language, of like virtuosic language that I think we saw, you know, in the past. I think there's also there's been a decline in language because of the rise of the image, the rise of the multimedia image, the rise
mm,
of film, etc. However, so that's a negative thing because it would be wonderful to look around at all the people who are alive at the same time as you and who are dealing with things and have them be speaking like to your heart, you know. So that's a negative. A positive is that never before has any group of people such as we had access to the enormous resources of history. Like we have, like I can go to the bookstore and buy, you know, 1,000 books of Japanese poetry, you
mm.
know,
Yeah.
like from you know 800 to 2000. You know, I can from my computer watch like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Czech movies.
Mm,
You know, the resources are just staggering. And so the funny thing that we find when there are so many resources of like what is beautiful and what is thoughtful and philosophical and difficult, is that the internet now and all of the availability of these books becomes like a measurement of people's curiosity. So the people, like I have many students, the ones who are really curious spend all their time like reading and watching film and looking at art. There's just endless resources to find what you can love, you know. And then the other ones, they just don't have the time because they would rather be on Instagram or doing something else. That's fine. It's a life, you know, you live and you die. You have some years, you get to choose what you're going to do. But before, like when I was born in Long Island, I could go to the library and try to find like, so if I wanted to find some books on existential philosophy in my library, maybe there was like one book and that was it. You know, I would have to walk all the way to a store to try to buy a cassette tape to listen to some music. You know, like you just have to, the resources are not so much, you know, never mind if you're born in the 18th century or in Soviet Union, where you might have to retype a manuscript in order to read a book, you know. So I think that yeah, there are good things and there are bad things about this time, and we should celebrate the good and, you know, avoid the bad, but sometimes it's hard.
I see. And yeah, regarding this different kind of ways to convey these ideas. So I was wondering, you consider that still, as you mentioned, a lot of people are focused only on like watching movies or TV series or even the social media. So you think that still the book, the literature is like I'm not sure if I can say the best way to try to convey one ideas, even philosophical ideas, or for example, this kind of the novels are already like outdated. So the young
Well,
people need like a new ways to grab this kind of idea.
well, the point that I was trying to make a moment ago was just that if there is something strange about this moment that needs to be depicted in books, it is like coming upon a like a rift, like a you know a chasm, or like coming upon a cliff, the breaking open of
Yeah.
the ground, where never before have has it been so separated, like people who are curious
Mm.
and people who are kind of dead. And
Oh,
they all walk around and they all like look the same, but then, you know, some people have things like are conversant with history, with philosophy, with other things, because it's just possible. It's really possible for everyone to do that if they choose.
mm,
Um, I think, yeah, I think that in answer to your question, the books are still relevant
mm,
for um, the practical matter of your life is that it's today. Like you're sitting here looking at this, you
mm,
know, it's morning time and you're looking at the computer and you can read like any of the great books of the past or of the present. And to some degree, the thing that is like the confusion of your life is that you're in a blank like landscape with fogs that come and go. Life is confusing. It's really hard to know how to evaluate things, how to say like this is more important than that, what you should do moment to moment, how you should feel, um, how to make divisions between objects and say, I want to group these objects, I want to put these objects singly, I want to think about the sounds of something, I want to think about the feel. Like how to feel and how to think and how to be is not something that has been solved in any way. And books are one of the best ways of making progress in this extremely complicated field of how to know what it is to be a human being, you know. However, in order to use these books of the past, a person has to have the like strength in reading and the strength in language to be to like it's no good reading books that are too difficult for you. And I think many people have sort of they've given up on like on reading difficult sentences. You know, you have these German type sentences where there's like one clause and then there's another clause and there's another clause, and like after you've gone for a while, it turns out that this one changes this one, changes this one, and then finally you get the object of the sentence or something.
Yeah.
And this is a very clear way. I mean, it's not always in German. Like Proust uses sentences like this also, you know, or Borges. And this is a way to say subtle things. And so I think the question about language is, how can we be most subtle in order to convey the experience of being human? And I think it's an emergency. I think it's very important for us to try to convey to one another how we're alive, and we do it this way. I mean, for one reason, because we're generally more expert. Everyone is very good at language. Like even people who are terrible at it are much better at language than they usually are at like drawing or painting or video or whatever. Like we're just, language is a, you know, whatever, it's like 50,000 years of language. You know, it's a long, we've been using language for a long time, you know. So I think it is important. And also the more whatever a person's resources are, there are beautiful texts that are written at varying levels of simplicity. So I think it's always worthwhile, and I think it's always necessary. Whether it will continue, you know, who can say? Because we have this, like, you know, monetization of clicks and everything else, and I don't know. It can be depressing, but I don't know. Another thing that one can think is just that if many people don't want to read books, then that means that there's used bookstores that are full of books that nobody wants, and then I can buy them. So that makes that makes me happy.
Positive side, right? So regarding this thing that you mentioned, that using this kind of language to convey own ideas, I'm not sure if you speak in other languages.
I speak Icelandic.
Sorry, what?
Icelandic.
Ah, I see.
From
So,
my first wife was Icelandic,
I
from
see.
Iceland. Yeah.
So you
And
mentioned
I
it's
have
important. Yeah,
I have terrible Spanish. I lived in Mallorca for a little while,
I see.
you know, in Palma de Mallorca. And I lived in France for a couple of years. So I have horrible, like very bad French and Spanish, but yeah, I have to work on them, you know. And I can't speak Japanese, but I can read Japanese music because
Oh, really?
the characters, because I play shakuhachi, which is a Japanese instrument. You know shakuhachi?
Yeah,
It's this instrument.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's very nice. Yeah. So yeah, what I wanted to ask you is about this. You mentioned before the maybe using the language in a new way to trying to convey ideas or trying to progress on the use of the word, um, or in the technical aspects of the novel, trying to make something innovative. I was wondering, you try to incorporate maybe other aspect of different languages that doesn't exist in the American language, in your books, in your writing, because maybe some people think that probably the peak of the the English is maybe from Shakespeare, for example, and from there is levels a decline. So, so what do you think? What are the main like technical aspect that you try to use or try to innovate in your books?
Well, I would say one is in depending upon the needs of the particular novel, it will be different. But for some, I can have these, I will use these German kind of sentences, these long rolling sentences. Sometimes I will use like crisp, clear detail, which would be like where the novel is a kind of the way that a dream can be clear and simple, even in its complexity, which I would say is a function of like the new novels, the French new novels, like Robbe-Grillet and all of these, you know, the mid-century French kind of novels. I think a lot of my reading is foreign, like almost, you know, most of it now, especially of contemporary work. I read, you know, there's just so much catching up to do that one has to do of you know the past, and in all different languages. I think, which is not even to get into, with different languages, when you read different writers like Rilke, for instance, Rainer Maria Rilke, there's a there's a way that he chooses to be subtle, which feels like embedded in the German, you know. And so if one chooses to be subtle in this, let's say, well, compare him with like Marquez or something. It feels like Rainer Maria Rilke in his entire life never heard one joke. He's like the least funny writer of ever. Like you never are reading him and they're like, there's no, there's like, it's as if he's never perceived that any human beings shared any joy in laughter, you know. Whereas for Marquez, it's like just part of the life. It's like the characters perceive the, you know, the humor of life. And same with, but you know, same with Kafka, who's extremely funny, you know. But then maybe like Octavio Paz, less funny. You know, he's more like there. He's more in a mythic, sometimes a mythic grand, you know, world. Whereas somebody like Vallejo, Cesar Vallejo, incredibly funny. You know, like life is like having your leg chopped off. You know, every day you wake up and your leg gets chopped off, and then you have to say something. You know, it's wonderful. Yeah.
So in this case, so for example, in other of your interviews, I heard that sometimes you're kind of disappointed that the people didn't grab the idea that you wanted to convey in some of your novels. So now that you mentioned this kind of trying to use the language in a new complex ways, so how did you find the balance between this writing for I mean the technical aspects, so like playing with the language and trying to convey the ideas as simple as possible to people can understand.
I think that I think a lot of the technical play that comes less from writing than it comes from reading. Like reading beautiful books and not reading garbage and like thinking about the work, the 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 moment of the writing itself, for me, it often seems not like I'm making choices. It sometimes seems exactly like someone is just whispering the words in my ear and I'm just typing them. Like I'm a typist. I'm just recording a secretary for a madman.
I see. Right. So maybe related to this thing and the thing that you said before, I also heard that uh maybe I'm not sure if I'm misquoting you, but that you hate entertainment,
Yeah.
particularly in books.
Yeah.
But I was wondering how did you put the like the threshold between the entertainment and entertaining reading? So maybe it's offensive to you that I say this, but actually I found entertaining reading your books. For example, like How to Set the Fire and Why. Well, that was kind of yeah, very, I'm not sure to say entertaining to read, but how do you put this kind of threshold between the entertainment itself and yeah, try to grab the people's imagination?
I think I would say overall something is entertainment
Mm,
if you're not forced to change who you are and what you think
mm,
in order to like bring it into your body and into your mind. And I think that within a given work, you have attributes of entertainment. Like we could call it like we could talk about the task of the storyteller. And so the task of the storyteller is to like reach into the like stick his hand into the body of the audience and grip its heart and terrify the audience and leave them forever changed after he goes. But in order to do that, it's like you you know, these disgusting medicines that like mothers would give you to like make your bones strong or something like that. You have like parts of the work that are this like disgusting medicine.
Mm.
And then a person like reads a paragraph and gets their medicine and the face changes.
Mm.
But so then the next paragraph has to be even more entertaining in order to bring them back. And then the next paragraph maybe has some of this cod liver oil. And then you know, and we see this even in Shakespeare, that there are like sections of the play that are kind of silly or funny, and then it goes back to something dark, and then something, you know, and this can be something that happens on the sentence level, where you have very clear, simple sentences, and then you have a long, difficult sentence. It can be a feature of the structure of a novel in that you have something that is like, that comes out of nowhere and is really hard to accept, like something like a scene of a slaughterhouse where you realize that like these like cows that are being led to their death potentially feel just as much as your grandmother feels, or something like that, you know. And then that scene ends, and then the next scene we could leap in and begin like some section that gives your mind a chance to think about something new, you know. Or there could be a section that is just very clear and thin and just going along, and then you're forced to just live in the moment after having perceived this difficult thing. And so that's part of it. People are really good at when they hear something that they don't want to hear, they're very good at unhearing it, at forgetting what they just heard. So part of what's important, I think, in a novel, especially the end of a novel, is to cut the novel off before you make the task too easy for your reader. You leave them with the difficult task, which is to assimilate being alive, like my experience of being alive, into their life.
I see. Yeah, I love your novels has this kind of, I won't say open ending, but yeah, like this, uh, yeah, it's not a conclusion. Gets to a conclusion of what's happening. Hmm. So in this, also following this idea, so your approach to the literature, I think, has changed from you started, I think, writing poetry, and then you turn more to the narrative ways to the novel. I'm not sure if you also write short stories. Sorry, I'm not sure about it. But for example, about the poetry, at least from my point of view, there are still some components of that in your novels. Some this kind of clear, similar to frames, very short chapters. So they're trying to convey some very focused ideas. I wanted to ask you if you, for example, uh, finished with poetry, that you give all you have to do with poetry, and now you want to do something like only focusing on novel, for example, or even if you're thinking like going into more not fiction, as not fiction works, like writing pure philosophy traits or something like that.
Well, I feel like fiction is still in its infancy.
Mm.
It's still a little
Mm.
child
Mm.
compared to poetry and the history of poetry, you know. So I feel like you have this like 99% of the really good work in literature that
Mm.
has been done has
Mm.
been poetry over the last 10,000 years, you know.
Mm.
And then for the like recent times, you know, we have the novel.
Mm.
And I switched to novel mostly because it's just um, the audience for poetry is too small. And also in English, the current state of poetry is sort of silly. Like people write things that don't make that much sense. A lot of it is not, to my mind, about
Mm.
the real experience of being alive. So although I published my first book in poetry, the poetry that I loved was the poetry of other countries and older poetry, you know. So it wasn't, I don't think I was going to be able to make a life as a writer in poetry. And so I said
Mm.
to myself, well, if you think you're a writer, you should be able to write whatever you want. So you should be able to write novels. So then I began to write novels. I do write short stories also, and some, nonfiction, other things, but um, mostly novels and short novels also, because I I like the fact that, as you say, you can use it to contain other things. There are many rooms, so there can be rooms of the novel that have poetry in them, and other rooms that are more, driven by narrative and exciting. Many rooms. I mean, and some people do this in film also. For instance, the Victor Erice film, The Spirit of the Beehive,
Mm.
has like sections that are almost like poems, like visual poems in it, and then it goes more into exciting parts, and it goes from one thing to another. So I think one of the benefits of certain forms is that they can include other forms within them.
And what about, so also I heard that you mentioned in other places that maybe actually what you write in some people couldn't identify as novels. For example, the chapters sometimes are very short chapters, or the ideas maybe are not kind of going into a linear way or a very clear narrative stream. But you mentioned that maybe you are writing your own philosophy. It's kind of more like a philosophical work. So yeah, I was thinking that if you're considering, yeah, writing this kind of philosophy treat, or do you are inspired or follow a particular philosophers, or what is the main influence of philosophy for your work?
Well, I think that the best writers are certainly generally also philosophers to some extent. And in some ways, they have an advantage over philosophers because philosophers try to specify that they specifically mean this or they specifically mean that.
Hmm.
But then history will judge what you mean, not you. You know, you get to say things, but history will ultimately be the judge of what meaning resides there. I think a lot of our artistic actions are done by accident. Partly because we don't ourselves necessarily understand who we are, or what we mean. Things flow through us. The wind of the world blows through us. And so you can have someone like Nietzsche, and it's really hard to say what Nietzsche exactly meant from his perspective. But history eventually says, well, this is his effect, and this is, what is meant. And I think in this way, sort of, um, I don't know who's an example, like a Kafka or Robert Walser. Robert Walser would, if you asked him like what he meant by something, he would refuse to say. I mean, he wants to say, every time he says something, he also wants to contradict it. He wants to say the opposite. He wants to re-say it again and contradict that. He wants to constantly, and that's the real benefit that we get as, especially writers of fiction, is to create works that are just absolutely full of contradiction, just as life is full of contradiction.
I see.
So you admit the ambiguity of experience. I think so. I'll continue presumably to do that. I hope, in the books. One of the reasons for the small chapters in a lot of my novels is I just noticed that people are bad at reading, and they
Yeah,
read too fast. So they come to a part that is important, and then they just go and they immediately are reading the next part. And so I thought, well, if it's just this, if after the important part they have to turn the page, at least you get like 3 seconds where they can think about it.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you about this kind of maybe because of the attention span, maybe a short attention span of the young people, or not so young. Maybe, for example, in my case, I noticed that recently my attention span has decreased a lot. But this kind of short chapters look more like watching a frame or a scene more than hearing a story or like a plot. So did you make the when you were writing this going to the this novel, The Children Six, it was your intention from the beginning to write this kind of more like frames or only scenes or visions, I like to say. instead of like telling a story?
I think to some degree, if someone does a shot like a shadow play for you, where they like they use cut pieces of paper,
Mm,
you know,
mm, mm,
and the cut pieces of paper somehow interact with your imagination in
mm.
such a way that you sit there and you watch and you feel that you've seen something. You know, you feel that a story has come out of looking at these little outlines of paper. You know, there's fire and it projects these shadows, and it can be quite beautiful. I feel like with a text, you have these strange tools like narrative, like plot, like characters,
Mm.
none of which really exist in a story. Like it drives me crazy when you hear some authors and they talk about their characters as if the characters are real people,
I see.
you know.
Mm,
And it's just a character is like a structural form that enables an idea or a sensation or a feeling to pass from the author to the reader, you know. And or you could say a character is a collaboration between the author and the reader, where the two of them bring everything they know to the creation of a new experience, which is the experience of the reader participating in something. And so because the world is full of characters, you know, lots of people,
mm.
it's something we can agree upon, like a philosophical conceit that we can agree upon. And then you can write and use it so that a character then can be the speaker of dialogue. But to imagine that a character like Huck Finn or something like has feelings and like hopes that exist outside of the book is just silly. It's, you know,
Mm.
he comes into being only on the page, you know. And so I think it's a delight to attempt to use all of these different structural elements to make it possible for in my case, I
Mm.
sit down, correct the text. I don't know what's going to happen,
Mm.
but as I begin to write and I'm playing with these different structural elements, all of a sudden these voices begin to speak and things appear. You know, so it's a blank page. You could sit down with a blank page, write nothing for 6 days in a row, and then shoot yourself with a revolver. You know,
Mm.
or you could find something that arises out of it that's magnificent, and then that enables you, like as the writer, to know your own life better, or to see it just for a second, to see maybe what your mind looks like.
Yeah, that's interesting because yeah, of course, I'm not a writer. I love reading books, but yeah, of course, I'm not a writer. I haven't experienced this kind of things, like transforming experience of or finding the ways of turning to words, this kind of obsessions of ideas. But maybe in a similar way, like a reading can have this kind of, as you mentioned, the importance of the real books try to transform the audience, right? The readings of readers of their work. So in some cases, did you think that, as you mentioned, your goal is to transform or make some kind of produce some kind of change in the reader? Have you thought that you may fall into some kind of uh, preaching or trying to? I think you work also. You work as a professor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So have you thought that maybe you're trying to give some kind of lesson or
No, no, I would never,
how do you
because
avoid doing that? Mm,
because I don't expect that I would know
mm,
what is changed in a person,
mm,
you know.
mm,
I think work becomes didactic if you're attempting to teach a specific lesson or attempting to show some particular thing, you
mm,
know. Like if I wrote a book like the Coetzee book, what is it called? Elizabeth. Coetzee has the book that is the book about animals, like not eating animals or whatever, you know. I can't remember the name of the book, but
Mm,
essentially, like, to some degree, the book is a polemic on behalf of like vegetarianism,
mm,
I think. And um, generally, my books are not trying to like achieve an aim to
mm,
make like
mm,
one thing change. Sometimes I'll point out something that is crazy, that doesn't make any sense.
mm,
For instance, um, well, just like in Silence Once Begun, that it's wild that you can confess to a crime and then go to jail, because why should your opinion about whether you did a crime or not matter? It doesn't make any sense that that would matter. Then people could just show up and confess to all manner of things and then go to jail. Like, it seems like it should be simply the facts of the case and not whether you. But as it turns out, we still have a primitive form of justice that goes back, thousands of years. And in that, it's more about you, like, on one hand you have the government, on the other hand you have you. And in that, if you admit that that you did the thing, then that's good enough for the government, and then they
mm,
take you away,
mm,
so it's really about whether you speak up for yourself. But it should be, in the case of the best kind of government, that the government speaks for everyone, including you. So there's no way for you to give up your rights. It's just a matter of factually what did or did not occur. So I might, in a book, I might like point something like that out, but I'm never going to um, draw a lesson about what someone should think about my books. And in fact, I would say a problem that I've had is that I do too little of that, of telling people what they should think about my books, so that at least American readers tend to be frustrated because they want me to be like, and this is the lesson that you should
point
learn
out.
from the book.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm just like, go live your life.
Mm.
It's on you.
Maybe the book that I've read from you that has this kind of more like a even in the text some kind of guidelines in the how to set fire. This like how ways for living, rules for living.
Yeah,
So
well, and that one is a bit like, I would say that one is a more accessible book. It's
mm,
easier
yeah.
for people, who are younger, for instance, to read
Mm,
it. Um, I returned, I think, in that book to my childhood in Long Island, in New
mm,
York, and her character is a little bit in a situation similar to my own.
mm,
So it's sort of like a trip back in time to like my own thoughts and feelings. But I think I think there are many people, for instance, who could read it and think that she is wrong about a lot of things. You know?
yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of like, ambiguity in the
Yeah.
things that she make, like morally speaking. So, but I was thinking, yeah, you think about you mentioned about this flaws in the government, particularly in the United States. Well, of course, there's thing happening in all countries, but and yeah, going from different point of views. For example, this in this how to say a fire from the anarchy maybe point of view, other books from democracy speaking. So, but in this case, in the novel, The Children Six has another kind of approach. Of, at least from my point of view, when this all the adults disappear from the earth, there's a new way of society from the children. It's more like a community aspects. Even the protagonist of the book turns into kind of witch doctor at the end. This kind of visions and this kind of thing. So more like a primitive civilization. So do you think that this is kind of way of uh, ideal way of living, going back to this kind of primitive communities, or maybe some similar, like for example, the kibbutz in Israel, or this kind of communal way of living?
One of the delights of reading that I've always felt is to read and learn about history
Mm.
of an earlier place, and then to, like, for instance, this 18th century France, and then to read also like the remembrances and writings, memoirs and novels of the people who lived then, and then to try to feel really how different it might have been to live at that time, and what kinds of things a person would think and wouldn't think. And then here in this day and age, I get to walk around and feel and think things that are different that I never would have thought, almost as if I took a time machine from the 18th century to now, you know? And so I think in our present moment, um, to some extent, we're not stuck living in this future that we live in. You can create a strange kind of space capsule and choose to bring into it like some things, you know. As you say, like one way to do that would be to live in a monastery or a kibbutz or something like that, you know. I think as far as anarchism, you know,
Mm.
there's a lot of different ways of disrespecting hierarchy that are, I would say, anarchic. Um, you know, you have the Sikhs in India who sort of like were a bit like Protestant, and they refused to accept caste long ago, you know, long before like Ambedkar and Gandhi, etc. And you have the same, like, you know, the same with like the Jainism and the Jains there, taking into account like the lives of animals. You have many like wild revolutionary movements in England in the like 15th, 16th centuries, like peasant uprisings all over the world, constantly peasant uprisings, often based on different types of. So I think, um, and not to mention like the American like Shakers or the Quakers, people who would disrespect rank as well. And I think so. So I think what you have in the present world is a thin authoritarian structure that attempts to force people to participate in it. But you yourself, because it always like we always have to think back to the practical thing, which is here I am, today is the day I'm alive. What am I going to do? And often it's possible to adopt, if not always, anarchic modes of action, at least anarchic modes of thought. So when you look at other people or think and talk to them, you can just refuse to think like this person is ignorant, or this person is silly, or this person is poor, or whatever. And you can just be open to God knows what they're going to do or say next. And then in many cases, because there's always an interaction, like you're on the street and you're talking to someone. If you make it possible for them to be someone different than they usually are, many times people will accept and they will be someone different than they usually are. And so I think that is one element of anarchism, is to allow things to be very open and allow things to move in surprising directions. You could say this is also a function of like derive and like situationism also, you know. There's so many metamorphing chimeras, so many different movements where people are trying to shake up and fight back against these, you know, supposed rules of existence. But I think it's quite possible.
Mm.
However, it does often require a good amount of hope and reading.
Mm.
Reading poetry helps.
Yeah, that you mentioned the hope. So this, I think, a lot of critics from your books mention that you show kind of like the most, a lot of times the depressing aspects of the human being, of the life, but also there's always this kind of hope at the end. Maybe not at the end, but yeah, there's some kind of, yeah, glimpse of hope. But for example, in this case, in the children six, it shows kind of yeah, of course, like this kind of apocalyptic view of the world. So and maybe something seem related to you said before that the adults are already like uh, done. They don't have any remedy. They don't have any cure. So maybe only the children are the people who can make something valuable or different in the world. So maybe what I want to ask you, maybe this is a very particular question, but it in your novel, this like the limit is age of 12. So do you consider something happens at that age? Biologically, psychologically, or socially, this kind of is a crucial uh, time of development or turning point.
I think it does happen even earlier. So
Mm,
I think that the subjugation of the individual
mm,
to the social atmosphere, when we begin to say things that we don't feel or mean, and we begin to copy people basically for no reason, you know.
mm,
I think often this is around like 9 or 10, but I made it 12 in the book because then I could have older child characters that were beginning to adopt some of the behavior of adults. And then that allowed for like a spectrum of different possible actions. Whereas if everyone was just like properly a
mm,
child, their actions would be more and speech would be more similar. So it allowed for some characters to have more like authority than others in some sense, you know, and more physical capability as well. But I think one of the things that's magical is that even if the whole like, you know, 6 billion humans are wiped out and there's
mm,
only like 100,000 that are left, you know,
mm,
on some island, I think the thing that is beautiful about human beings would remain. I don't think we need all 6 billion of us. So I think that the like curiosity and love, um, patience, altruism, I think that these things are very natural human qualities, especially if they're not suppressed.
I see. So all these like positive traits of the human uh, are, yeah, like you mentioned, innate, uh, present in the children's, but also you consider all this, also the bad aspects are also latent in the children. So maybe at that age, I remember, yeah, this children's at age of 12, 13 are very cruel, are very mean people. So yeah, it's kind of the thing. So yeah, so finally, I like to ask you, maybe you've been asked this a lot before, but I read that in your duty as a professor, I'm not sure how do you address this, but what I've read is that you teach some non-conventional activities like walking or leisure time or dreaming or something like that.
Yeah.
So did you see this kind of also this kind of philosophical approach to living, to, for example, like some kind of meditation, this kind of during walking or during leisure time, or how did you approach this teaching this kind of uh, activity?
I think for a student to make progress, it's important for them to go and find the films that they love, the art that they love, the
Mm,
books that they love. But I think that that task is largely their own. They
mm,
need to do that. No amount of me putting books in their hands and like yelling at them to read them
mm,
will make that much difference.
mm,
If it's a person who will go and find the books in the library, then they will, whether I exist or not, you know.
mm,
So I feel like I will leave to them the natural task that is a person's, which is to find what you love. Here's the world. The world is there for you. Go find what you love. But the thing that sometimes the classes can help with, I think, are to help you make a fracture in your existence in order to see like real life. So the danger is that we have consensus ways of thinking and consensus ways of acting. And when we move through a day, especially if we're writing about it, if you write about something always using consensus language, and if the idea is a combination of just consensus like objects, then you won't ever write anything that is particularly interesting. You could write something that is very successful. Of course, these are like some of the books of the American authors, that are, very successful right now. But when you're reading a book and you turn a page and you come upon something that is both at the same time extremely strange and also like you're reading the book, you turn the page and you come across something and it's extremely strange and it's something that you've always known. It's both things. Like immediately words are given to something that you felt when you were 4 years old and like sitting in your bedroom. And it's something like the revelations of like the greatest revelations that we can experience are never unfamiliar to us. They're always deeply familiar. They come from the root of being. And so if you are going to try to write a poem or a novel that has some fracture that gets to the core of what it means to be like a living person, then you can't go around like day to day just walking the same path and speaking about things the same way that everyone else does. You need to find a way to fracture your vision to see what's really there, which is a religious goal, as you say. It is something that has to do with meditation. It is something, but it doesn't have to be meditation. It just has to be vision. You have to have the vision, and we do have that vision again and again in our lives naturally. Like a common time is like when you go to the movies and you come out of like a really exciting movie, and then you're just standing there on the carpet, like looking around, and you go into the bathroom and you look and you see yourself in the mirror, and the way that you look is crazy. You're like, is that what I look like? And you look at yourself as if you've never seen yourself before for a second, or we get these experiences from, ayahuasca or DMT or whatever, but sometimes like whatever it is, whether it's meditation or drug use, it can close these experiences in such a way that they're not accessible to you to use them so easily in writing. And so what needs to be created is a mode of proceeding where as you're writing, as you're sitting and writing, you make some like sharp mental progress that has to do with sight and vision so that it's recorded at that moment, but it isn't, this is why, for instance, some, Bresson would like make people do a scene again and again and again and again and again until finally a little bit of reality came into the camera. And then that's it. That's great. That's the film, So it requires fracture. And so that's something that I felt maybe it's possible if you have a class about walking and you make people walk around this Chicago is a crazy city. And if you make them walk around Chicago and see the real city that's there, a city that they potentially have never seen, even if they've lived in it for years,
So in order to find this kind of fracture, as you mentioned, in the how you conceptualize the world, so do you think it's important for a writer to experience some, for example, very like strong situations, for example, experience death, experience war, experience, I'm not sure, this kind of very terrible things in life, or it's not, you can find this kind of experience and change from other ways, not so drastic.
I don't think it needs to be drastic. I mean, I think that, and when I say transformation of a vision, like it can be something incredibly tiny, something incredibly small. I mean, if you have you have years of your life and the ways that you do, and if you read a page of some writer, and then it just changes how you feel about lifting up a cup, that's a transformation, a vast transformation. I mean, if I could read a novel and it would change drinking coffee, it's great, So I think it can be something small. It doesn't have to be. And I think there are writers who didn't leave their hometown. They stayed in their hometown their whole lives, and they're still great writers and prophets, you know. To some extent, Grace Paley is a writer who writes sort of like small, calm stories, and then ends up penetrating the real. So it's quite, you know, it's quite possible. Um,
Okay, you see, so I think that will be all. So I
okay,
really appreciate your time.
yeah,
So
sure.
yeah, hopefully maybe later we can talk about other review books if you have something to. Yeah, of course, as I mentioned, the blog is um yes to avoid Spanish translated books. So of course we could talk about different things, but maybe in the future, the more books of you translated Spanish, I'd like to talk to you again if you have the time.
Yes.
Hope we can keep in touch. And I love to hear you playing the Japanese flute sometimes. So
Yes.
yeah, so thank you
Well,
very
thank
much.
you.
Yeah, have a good day. So see you later. Bye bye.